Hi everyone. Today we're going to be looking at qualitative study designs. There are still a few people logging in. Leandra is going to be taking care of that. If you have any difficulty during this webinar, please message Leandra query at sun.ac.za. Also, please use the message function in the webinar. So on the bottom left of the screen, there's a little message bubble. If you click on it, you should see a conversation IM chat box appear, and you can type messages in there as questions come up, or if you have technical difficulties, please feel free to message in there. Okay, I see some people are messaging in the box already. That's wonderful. Let's get started. My name is Lynn Hendrik. Succeed is looking at improving the capacity for operational research as part of the agenda. We have 10 protocol workshops that we are offering this year. It started in the beginning with the value of operations research. Then we moved on to how to define your research question. We looked at formulating a literature review. And most recently, we had a workshop on quantitative study designs. This is our fourth workshop that we are offering now, which is on qualitative study designs. Following this, our next workshop will be on mixed methods. Just some rules for us to use during this webinar. There are icons at the bottom. Leandra would have muted you as soon as you entered into the room. If you do see the little microphone, it's the second circle at the bottom. If it's not got a cross on it, that means that we can hear you, and I'd prefer if everybody is muted until we get to the question and answer section. Also, please make sure that your camera is switched off. We are trying to do that for you, but if you do notice, please switch your camera off as well. We'll also see that we've put a little picture there. If you see yourself, it means that we can also see you. So please make sure that that is turned off all the time. During the webinar, we're going to be using the poll function. This is just a way for us to ascertain whether you are following with us. We are going to try it now just to see how it works. So the question is, have you been involved in qualitative research before? Lovely, Dylan. I'm so excited. We're going to transform you into a qualitative fundi in the next hour. This is wonderful news. Oh, there the poll is up and running. So simply click yes or no and indicate your choice. Okay, so we've got 2 votes so far. I see there are 3. Okay, for those of you that haven't been in qualitative before, that is very awesome. Today, I'm just going to be giving you a brief overview. I'm sure you're going to be excited about it, and you're just going to run out of this webinar and want to start doing qualitative right now. So let's get into it. So these are the 5 main concepts that we are going to cover today. First, we're going to get some understanding around the qualitative paradigm. Then we're going to distinguish between qualitative and quantitative research. Third, we're going to describe the main approaches to a qualitative study. Fourth, describe and identify the types of questions that are answered by qualitative research. And once we have set the scene for all of that, we'll describe the benefits and the weaknesses of qualitative studies. So let's start here. I want you to just, for a moment, have a look at this picture that's displayed. You may or may not have seen it before, but how many legs does this elephant have? Some people see no legs because none of them are attached to the elephant. Some people see 8 legs. Some people see 3. What I'm trying to show you is that we are all seeing things a little bit differently. Let's look at these 3 lines. Which line is longer? A, B, or C? Some people may say that B is the longest line because A does look a little bit shorter. But when we look at these lines, they are actually the same. Again, it's showing us that our perceptions vary from individual to individual. The third picture, what do you see? Do you see a girl's face, a man's face, some scribbling? But actually, it depends how you looked at the picture. Some people will see the girl's face circled by the red circle. Other people will see the man's face that's to the right of the circle. Again, how we look at things varies from individual to individual. So qualitative research is something that is encapsulated in our senses. It's data that is gathered using our senses, which is a bit different to quantitative research. In quantitative, we don't really try to be part of the research that is happening. We try to maintain objectivity. But in qualitative, we actually embrace the concept of subjectivity, how you interpret the data, and even how you report the data. We all know about communication and how people say things. There's the 7 C's of communication. And the context influences communication. The tone of voice influences communication. In qualitative, we build on these existing things that we know is happening, and we acknowledge that our senses influence the data that we are collecting. So quantitative research focuses on objectivity, where we try to remain as objective as possible, where we're not influencing or biasing the data collection. Qualitative, on the other hand, tries to be as subjective as possible. In quantitative, we are counting, we are looking at incidence, prevalence, means, variance. In qualitative, we are not counting as much as we are trying to understand what is happening in the context or in the environment or with the phenomena. We're not interested in presenting charts and figures, although there are certain types of qualitative research where you can present charts and figures. The focus here is more on meaning and understanding, and that comes from words and stories, text, what people say. It's not about how much medication somebody takes, it's about how they experience the process of taking the medication. How do they experience the side effects? So on the one hand, with quantitative work, we're going to look at symptoms or side effects. On the other hand, we are looking at people's perceptions of these symptoms and side effects. We're looking at individual responses, and this again goes to subjectivity. Knowing that you are a role player, we also understand that participants have individual experiences. Not everyone will experience something exactly the same way, and even if they do, not everyone will report what they experience exactly the same way. So if we are trying to really think about the qualitative paradigm, it still falls within the same cycle of research. We still have to define our question, search for the terms, appraise, synthesize, adapt, and implement. We've been through the cycle before. However, there are different methodologies, and the one we're going to focus on today is on the qualitative methodology. Research in itself is a continuum. What we have are 4 certain aspects of research. The first one being the ontology. What can we know? So people have different worldviews. We have the realists and we have the relativists. So on the left-hand side, we've got the realists, and the left-hand sides will generally show you the quantitative side, and the right-hand side will show you the qualitative side. So we have realism. Realism says, I can only know what I see. I can only know what is fact. Relativism says that we all have our own views of what the truth is and what can be known, and there are multiple ways of knowing the truth. How would you place yourself, realism or relativism? Do you generally believe that everything has to be factual, or do you believe that there are multiple truths for the same thing? The next one is called epistemology. How can we know? The first one was what can we know? The second one is how can we know that? So we've got positivists and we have interpretivism. Positivism again focuses on factual. You have to scientifically know that something is there and proven to be true. Interpretivism says that we can all see the same experiment happening, but we can interpret it differently. Also, that truth is constructed. So this is a very tricky thing, and it's very philosophical in how they bring across constructionism. In the social sciences, there's a huge body of work with constructionism and how people's truths are evolved over time. So even your truth in your profession as a medical officer or as a doctor or as a nurse or someone, whoever you are in your profession, your truth is different to a colleague's truth, even though you have the same job profile, because your truths have been constructed over your lifetimes through experiences. Then the third part is the methodology. How can we find out? And this is how we actually do the practice of finding knowledge. So if I'm a positivist and I believe that I must prove things through experiments to create facts to be scientifically true, then I'm going to always focus my area of work on quantitative studies. If I am an interpretivist and I believe that knowledge and opinions, attitudes, beliefs are constructed and that everyone has their own subjective truths, it's not going to make sense to me to use a questionnaire to ascertain people's beliefs. Because by using the questionnaire, I'm already assuming that everyone's going to give me the same answer. So I'd rather use a qualitative approach where I use open-ended questions and I allow people to give me the answers they choose to give me, rather than a quantitative list of items that they could choose from. So what I'm trying to show you is that simply doing qualitative and quantitative work doesn't just happen in isolation. It is based on your lens or how you view the world. It's how you view data and it's how you view the phenomena. Lastly, from the methodology, we move to the method. So the methodology is how can we find out? The method is what tool do we use? If we're doing qualitative studies, we can do things like interviews or diaries, and I'm going to show you a few methods today. If you are doing a quantitative study, you're going to focus more on experiments and surveys. So there are a few qualitative words that people like to throw around, and I'm sure that you have heard a few of them before. The most important one, I think, for us going forward is the word subjective experience, meaning everybody has their own unique individual experience of a phenomena. You as a researcher, you have a job to report what is true and to report what your participants are experiencing and feeling. It's not our job as researchers to interpret or redirect what people are saying to fit our agendas. It's about simply taking what people say and reporting their own unique experiences, their perceptions, their understanding, not your understanding. There's no right or wrong in qualitative research because we respect everybody's right to their individual experience. We are interested in the meanings that people ascribe to phenomena. So if we look at something like HIV treatment adherence, adherence means something very different to each individual person. So to the patient, to the doctor, even between doctors, between patients, adherence in itself is not the dictionary definition. It's about how we define those things. The other word I would like you to redirect your thinking towards is participants. So in quantitative research, we like to call people sample or subjects, but because we are working with meaning and people's feelings, we refer to them as participants in our studies. We also like to focus on exploring what people believe instead of us putting our own perceptions of reality on other people. Okay, very important for us to reframe how we think when we are collecting qualitative data. You are the student in this scenario, and the participant is the teacher in this scenario, telling you what they know and what they experience because that's what you want to know. That is how we can make sense of what is occurring in the phenomena. It doesn't help for phenomena to occur and for us to tell people, please select out of these 4 feelings how you feel about your experience of taking your HIV treatment medication. That means we are pushing our realities onto others. Okay, so there are various reasons that we use qualitative research in our everyday data collection research world. The main one being to develop theory. When we work with an inductive approach, meaning we use a grounded theory approach, we start with knowing nothing, and I'm putting that in air brackets because you do know some things from your literature review, but you don't yet know how your participants experience the phenomena. And we can use their sentiments, their quotes, their words, their text to contribute to theory that we are developing. It contributes to change and knowledge further than quantitative can do on its own. Not saying quantitative is wrong and qualitative is right, but together the mixed method approach does make an extra large contribution to knowledge. You can clarify unexpected or significant findings in your quantitative research. So maybe you find that a certain group of participants excel way more than others. They are the outliers in your study. You need to understand why that happened and not speculate on the reason that happened. You'd use the qualitative approach to find out the reasons. It contributes to health and healing. There's a lot of participants, even in my experience that I've spoken to, that when they tell me their stories, it would be the first time that they told their stories to anybody. And it helps the participant move on from certain experiences. It also gives the participant a room or a place to talk about what they might be going through. Provides in-depth information, additional perspectives, which is very important. And then also it helps to understand subjective experiences in an environment. It's especially important in qualitative research when you find qualitative studies that have been done overseas or in other countries or even in another clinic. And we think because we see on it that it's a rural clinic in a low-income country, people must be experiencing the same thing. It might not always be true because our context may be completely different. Their life journeys are completely different, which influences their stories that they will tell you. So if we look at qualitative, again, we are looking at people's experiences. How did they feel about something instead of just counting or looking at quantitative measures of their experience. I put this table together, but I only want us to focus on the qualitative column for now. And if we look at this, it just summarizes what I've been trying to say. The purpose is to understand and interpret social interactions. They are usually smaller groups. There may or may not be random selection. It depends on the topic and your research question. But generally, sample sizes, and we'll talk about this some more in the workshop, sample sizes are tiny. With interviews, we work with anything from 6 to 10 people. In a focus group, we have between 5 to 9 people or 10 people. If you're doing multiple focus groups, you can have multiple focus groups times 5, but not more than 9 participants in that single focus group at a time. The types of data we collect is words or images, so there's visual research, objects. People can draw during your interview. They can complete tables or charts or graphs, but anything that facilitates the talking process is usually part of your data. We use mostly open-ended responses, interviews, observation. We're going to speak a bit about these types of methods. And then overarching types of data analysis is to collect patterns that emerge from the data. So those are generally called themes and codes. But most importantly, your role as a researcher, you recognize your biases. So there's a part in your protocol that you do qualitatively that is called the reflexivity, where you reflect on your role as a researcher. So for me, if I was doing a research study on homeless people, then I would reflect on myself and my biases and say that I live in a house that I own. I'm a colored female. I have never been a homeless person. I've engaged with homeless people when I see them on the street or scratching in the bins. And in that way, I'm telling the reader I recognize my own characteristics and I recognize where my worldview comes from. And in order to try to limit my biases in all of this during the research, I'm going to keep a diary where I jot down any thoughts that I may have that I need to reflect on in the process. Okay, so it's just about recognizing my role as the researcher, being subjective. I don't try to generalize my findings because, again, if you really think about multiple truths, everyone has their own unique experiences, then it just doesn't mean that any generalization is actually possible. Yes, we can say that for this group, they experience the phenomena this way, and it may be true for others, but we can't say definitively that this is true for everybody. So again, just one last look as research as a continuum, seeing the differences emerge between qualitative and quantitative. I would like us now to move to the main approaches of conducting qualitative research. Okay, so qualitative research also has the capacity for interpretation and also applies critical and scientific approaches. It's not haphazard. We just don't go around and interview random people about random things and let them say random words which we randomly collect that we can't generalize. We have a structured approach and we have mechanisms in place that we can make the process of data systematic. We are concerned with opinions, feelings, and experiences, and we want to describe the social phenomena as they naturally occur. So some of the ways that we try to make it systematic is that we do have a protocol where we define our context, and that's how we describe our social phenomena in a naturally occurring environment. I would describe the clinic I'm working in. I would describe the environment the clinic is within, the political and social context of the clinic. I would describe patients that visit the clinic, maybe the burdens of diseases, the main challenges in the clinic, but the reader basically has an overview of what the clinic social environment is like. After that, in the method section, I would explain who my participants are, how I sampled them, how many, how I plan to collect my data, my ethics in my study, how I plan to do my data analysis. You follow the same research approach as you would in a quantitative study. Your ultimate goal here is that we want to help the reader understand the social world of our participants. We want to give them a holistic perspective. Qualitative data is generally collected through direct and indirect encounters. So the indirect encounters is not as popular yet, but it is evolving. Direct encounters mean things like doing an interview, doing a focus group, doing observation, watching interactions between doctor-patient, watching interactions between parent-child. Indirect encounters is when we move to more meta-analysis or synthesis of qualitative data, so systematic reviews of qualitative studies, or we do synthesis of qualitative information we find in blogs or online, and I'll speak about that a little bit more later. Please remember, as we go in along, if you have any questions or you have any muddy points or something is not making sense just yet, please type it into the message box, and as soon as I see it, I will try to go back and explain it before we continue. I'll give you a chance now. Let's wait about 20 seconds if there's something that is not yet clear before I continue. Okay, so there's a comment from Sandiswa regarding sampling. The sampling we're not going to discuss today. If we have time at the end, I can give you some pointers around sampling, but that is something that we're going to be discussing in the face-to-face workshop. Okay, so while Sandiswa is, okay, great. Thanks, Sandiswa. I'm glad that you noted it. So these are the qualitative research methods. There are many more, and some of these can be, even defined and made into even smaller categories. I'm just giving you a broad overview today, just giving you a taster, make you excited about qualitative research. The first one we're going to focus on is interviews. and I'm going to end with systematic reviews. So interviews, this is our most popular way of doing qualitative research, interviews and focus groups. This is where you sit in a room with somebody or with a group of people and you're asking them questions and eliciting information from them. There are three types of interviews and focus groups: structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. So a structured interview means that you've got a list of questions that you're going to ask every single participant. So this is in an interview with one person. You ask every person the same questions in the same order and you don't deviate from the questions on the page. An unstructured interview is where you go in with broad, overarching questions. Some qualitative researchers even only have one question that they go into the interview with. And as the interview evolves, they end up having a long conversation, sometimes for 2 hours, 3 hours, but the conversation is where the participant directs the conversation. So for example, an unstructured interview: how did you experience your visit to the clinic this morning? It's broad. It's speaking about the experience at the clinic that they are currently at this morning. When the participant responds, it was very long and I was so tired, then the interviewer will say, can you tell me why you were tired or what made it feel longer? Is there anything that you can do, that you can think of, that would have made it better? But the conversation just flows from there. It takes a very skilled researcher in qualitative methods to conduct an unstructured interview. And most students and newcomers to qualitative, and even those who are seasoned in qualitative, prefer the semi-structured approach. So here you've got some questions and you have what we call probes. So these are trigger words that we can use when we ask the questions. It doesn't matter which order you ask the question in, which makes sense because some people may speak about question 1, then question 5, and we can't stop them and say, please don't answer that question yet, that's question 5. Can we please go back to number 2? We want to make sure that the conversation flows. So the semi-structured approach allows us to move between questions, to add extra questions. What we see here is that there are certain considerations we need to use when we conduct an interview or focus group. Please make sure that you use a trained interviewer. I know there are few students who have conducted their own interviews for the first time, and that's fine, but it just takes a little bit of practice, working with somebody who's already done qualitative research. Once you get the hang of it, it's a skill that you're going to have forever. And I think it's really cool when researchers are able to conduct their qualitative interviews on their own. It helps you when you are busy with your data analysis. It helps you when you are trying to interpret what you find. It's always best practice for you to do your interview if you have the skill set to do it. It's very important to make sure about where you are conducting the interview. Is it a private, safe space? Is it somewhere that the participant feels comfortable? There's no noise, nothing being rushed around. Be clear about how long the interview will take and what you'll be asking them about. All of these considerations are generally in the consent form that they sign before. Consent forms generally contain another piece of information that quantitative studies don't contain. So first, it contains information about being recorded. So we usually generally record them on the voice recorder. The information will be transcribed, and also that the quotes or the text will be used, and then also about anonymity and pseudonames. The interviews themselves, I mean, there's such a lot to read around how to conduct a good interview. It's about how you position yourself. It's about power dynamics in the relationship, the words that you use, how you are dressed, how you approach the person, in which context you approach them as the researcher. It goes back to our discussion around subjectivity and perception. If you as a qualitative researcher know that people have different perceptions and unique experiences, then they are also experiencing you as a researcher. So how you present yourself is going to influence the data that you have. Okay, that's where the understanding around subjectivity and reflexivity comes about. If I was going back to my example of interviewing a homeless person, if I'm dressed in a business suit with my briefcase and I've got the best clothes on and I approach him while he's scratching in my bin to ask him about how does he feel about living on the street, I'm going to get a very different set of responses to me dressing in normal looking clothes, going to a park somewhere where they are sitting or relaxing, not doing anything, and then starting a conversation, saying who I am, and then asking them about their stories. Okay, so your approach to the interview influences what you find. There's also a method called ethnography, and in this type of study, you are placed in the community of interest and you are writing about what is happening in that community. So there are different types of studies. I know the most recent one I read was the researcher spent 2 years in the field investigating how patients are treated in a hospital. She basically reported on her experiences of being there for the last 2 years, what she picked up, knowledge that she had gained, models of action that she saw evolving because of what she observed. And then there's another interesting type of study. I now have met two people who've written PhDs on themselves. I mean, if you don't have a topic, yourself is always a topic. Autoethnography. Very interesting body of work. But this is where you basically write about your experiences and the phenomena you are interested in. So if you are, let's think of a generic example, somebody, so the last PhD student that I saw, she had experienced rape, violence, she had experienced sexism, all in the workplace. And what she did was write an autoethnography about her experiences, but then a literature review was about these issues in the workplace and how it changes one's worldview. It spoke about gender and power relations, but it was all based on her story. Very interesting methodology. Okay, there's also another nice way of collecting data is visual research methods, and this is the one I'm most interested in, is there's examples like photo voice, video diaries, drawing, network mapping. I'll show you some examples now, but I mean, in the technology age we are working in, these visual methods are just booming. Photo voice is a very interesting way. The last photo voice study I was involved in, I think we were working with car guards here in Cape Town. And most of the car guards that were working at the shopping center were from out of country and they were immigrants. And it was around the same time as the xenophobic violence that erupted here in Cape Town a few years ago. We took disposable cameras and we explained the study to them. We got the informed consent. We tried to find out what their stories were, where they were living, what their family life was like, what their circumstances were like. Who were these people that were car guarding, and what were their aspirations and goals? Like, what were they hoping to achieve with their lives? And we gave them the cameras. They went and they took pictures that described their stories. We printed the pictures and then we sat together under a tree outside the shopping mall and we looked at their photographs, and through their pictures they revealed their stories. The report looks wonderful. It has pictures in there. It shows people's own raw data, and it has the text that explains what you see in the photo. The video diary is a similar concept where people can record things that have meaning for them. We've got drawing. I think I have a few examples here. So this is a visual board example. Here in the study, we were looking at how chores are divided between genders in the household. So in the one column you see dad, and the one column you see mom. On the left hand side, that newsprint paper is in the father focus group we did, and in the right hand side it's the mother's focus group we did. And we spoke about these things in the focus group. Everybody had a chance to place their stickers where they saw fit. And after the stickers were placed, we had a long discussion around chores and gender in the household. Even after the focus groups happened, we as researchers could compare the father and mother groups between. In the same study, we were looking at where young people go for HIV services. And what we asked them to do was to draw a map of their community. And in drawing the map, they then placed where the clinic was, how they traveled to get there, and we spoke about their access to facilities. I could ask them about the big field and what happened on the field. And they said it was too far to walk across the field for them to get there. And after school, it might be a little bit dangerous. So it was a useful tool to use in the focus group. There's another tool called body mapping. And in this focus group, people were looking at parts of the body that they had pain in. So on the left-hand side, it's one of my colleagues who conducted the study. They were looking at women and violence in the household. And what they did was they would place a woman on the newsprint paper, they would outline her body, and she would indicate violence that has been perpetrated against her. And then she would speak about how she experienced it, and visually others, it resonated with them, but also they could relate to what was happening and then indicated on the map where they had similar experiences. If you bring this back to the health sciences, we could easily see with new medications how it affects the body, especially studies with kids. We don't know what yet happens or what the experiences are. Body mapping is an awesome tool to use for children. And then we've got observation. And observation here, like I said, can be direct and indirect, structured and unstructured. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to speak about the main concepts. Direct observation, which is structured, means I know what I'm looking for. So if I come to your clinic, then I'm going to sit in the waiting room, and my study is about what people do while they are in the waiting room. But I'm focusing specifically on men between the ages of 30 and 40. And that is direct observation because I'm sitting in the waiting room, and it's structured because I know exactly what I'm looking for. If it's unstructured, I'll go into the room and I will just be observing and making notes about everything that is happening. Not only the one specific thing that I set out to do. There's also disguised and undisguised, so I can say who I am and reveal my identity as a researcher, or I can pretend that I'm part of the crowd, those in the waiting room. But these are ethical implications that you need to consider before you plan observation. And then we also have human versus mechanical. So there are some video software that you can observe a room and cue in what you are looking for. Very fancy software, but most of us will probably use human observation. And then this is a very exciting method, the online qualitative methods, where you can conduct your social media analysis. You can look for trends on Twitter. You can analyze people's tweets. You can track disease online, the movement of disease between countries, how people experience it. I know when they track the flu disease, they basically search the hashtag flu, and they could track how the flu spread across the world in a season based on people that were tweeting about the flu. You can analyze blogs and news feeds, the same how you use photo voice. I've had a student that's done an Instagram study where she looked at anorexia on Instagram and the pictures that people posted and did an analysis around that. You could look at blogs and news feeds. You can conduct interviews and focus group discussions over Skype, or like we are doing now, the Skype for Business, where we can do a focus group or an interview. Okay, so the options are endless. The whole purpose of qualitative, and we have to go back right to the beginning, is to understand people's subjective realities and people's individual experiences. And we don't say we're doing a qualitative study. We first define our question, and then we say which method fits the question. Which brings us to our research questions. So here are two examples of qualitative studies in the literature. Is social capital a useful conceptual tool for exploring community-level influences on HIV infection? An exploratory case study. The second one, a qualitative study on the experiences and perspectives of public sector patients in Cape Town, managing the workload of demands of HIV and type 2 diabetes comorbidity. Okay, if you look at that question, the key words around qualitative studies are in there. We've got exploratory, exploring, we've got experiences, perspectives, and managing and qualitative study. Okay, those are all cues for us to look for. So qualitative questions, I've put an example here to show you the difference between qualitative and quantitative. In a quantitative study, what is the prevalence of depression within the population? Researchers using the qualitative approach would ask, what is your understanding of depression, and could you describe your feelings and emotions? Okay, different approaches. So we are all familiar with the PICO way of defining questions: population, intervention, comparison, outcomes, and time. It's a very quantitative approach to defining a research question. If we look at the qualitative approach, I want to introduce you to the concept of PI, with P being your patient, your population, your participants, with I being your issue or your intervention. So remember, in a quantitative study, you're comparing an intervention to a comparison group. In qualitative, we don't really have comparison groups, but we do have issues or phenomena of interest that we investigate within our participants. Then E is our evaluation method. So how are we collecting the data? Another approach is the spider approach, and I particularly enjoy this one. It's the sample or participants, the phenomena of interest, the design, the evaluation, and the research type. So if you look at the phenomena, so phenomena would be adherence is a phenomena. Side effects of a medication is a phenomena. Waiting time in the clinic is a phenomena. Your design is how you're going to do the study. And then the evaluation outcomes is, are you looking at perceptions or attitudes or beliefs or knowledge? And then your research type would be qualitative or mixed method. So here's another example using the spider approach. The question is, what are young parents' experiences of attending antenatal education? The sample I'm working with are young parents. The phenomena is antenatal education. The design is I'm using a survey but in focus groups. So my evaluation is the experiences that I'm looking at, and the research type is qualitative. Here's another example. What are the experiences of women undergoing IVF treatment? Sample is women. Phenomena is IVF treatment. The design is the questions I will ask in the interviews. The evaluation is experiences, because the question says what are the experiences, and the research type is qualitative or mixed methods. So if you would like to, I'm going to give you an opportunity now, another few seconds, for you to look at the question, what are the experiences of women undergoing IVF treatment, and see if you can come up with your own question. If you would like to, you can type it into the box and we can have a look at it. So I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds to see if you can create your own question. Okay, here's a question from Dylan. What are your experiences of intrauterine contraceptive or subdermal device? That's lovely. So what we can do with that question is, instead of your Dylan, I would replace that with a population. So what are women's or mothers or young women? But make your population a little bit more specific instead of your. Okay, the same comment for you, Sandiswa. Describe your emotions while in the IVF treatment. So again, yeah, I would make your population very specific. to the group you are focusing on. Is it women that have undergone IVF and had failed treatments? Is it women with first-time IVF treatment? Is there a certain age group you are focusing on? So these questions are great. It's just defining the populations are important. Okay, what are the experiences and perceptions of caregivers of relatives with pre-dialysis chronic kidney disease? Wonderful. So we have our sample, that is our caregivers of relatives with pre-dialysis chronic kidney disease. We have our phenomena of interest. We have our design, which I think you probably naturally from that would do interviews. We have our evaluation, which is experiences and perceptions, and our research type is qualitative. It seems like this webinar is working. We're creating qualitative experts here. What do experiences do women who have failed multiple IVF have? Okay, so what are the experiences of women who have failed multiple IVF treatments? Okay. Thanks, guys. That was really great. So I think we all have an idea of how we put together our questions, qualitative research questions with our sample, our phenomena, our design, our evaluation, and our research type. I'm really impressed with you guys. So let's move to the benefits of qualitative research. As you can gather from what we have seen, the research that we do qualitatively is done within people's context. So in comparison to more quantitative methods, it can produce results that directly represent how people feel. Not only do we know the reasons why people are doing what they do. So let me say, for example, there's a study that we're working on, which is an overview of systematic reviews looking at the reasons people do or don't take their HIV medication treatment. So one study that we are doing is simply listing the reasons. So people can't get to the clinic on time, people don't want to tell their spouses, parents are not giving their kids medication, people feel better so they stop taking their medication. It's all the reasons that we know about medication adherence. But a qualitative study explores those reasons even further. And instead of saying people don't want to tell their spouses, it investigates why they don't want to tell their spouses. So maybe for fear of being left, for fear of violence, fear of what they might say, it just adds another level to people's experiences that they are reporting. Reports are often more accessible. People find reading qualitative papers more interesting and exciting. People are nosy. They want to see what people say. So they'd rather read that than read some stats that is in a journal article. It may be easier for beginner researchers to feel closer to everyday thinking and more human around what they are studying. And qualitative methods can be useful for the production of new ideas, so things that you might not have thought of. Remember that your knowledge on a certain topic is based on what you've read in the literature and your experience. But knowing that our experiences are all different, when I start interrogating phenomena qualitatively, I then start seeing other reasons that I may not have thought of. Some limitations of this method is that the researcher's subjectivity and bias can have a serious problem in the analysis. So if you're not aware of your biases in the very beginning of your study, it's going to influence how you interpret the data. So some participants may be telling you reasons that you haven't thought about. Because we are only human, we will overlook those and we will only focus on what we want to see. Okay, it's about being open-minded when you look at the information that is in front of you. There is a lot of work involved in the qualitative transcribing and analysis of the data. So generally, transcribing and analysis takes way longer than collecting the information. Whereas quantitatively, collecting the data is quite a tedious process if you've got a really large sample size, but inputting it and doing the analysis takes a couple of days. It's the other way around with qualitative research, but generally everyone finishes around the same point. Transcribing and translation and analysis can be very time consuming and costly, and a lot of people prefer to do it themselves, but it does take a little bit of time. Conclusions may not always be easily generalizable owing to the smaller samples and the non-random sample technique. But it's not really a limitation because we don't aim to generalize our findings. You also need quite a high field worker skill if you are having others do your interviews for you and to manage the project of this nature. Okay, so what we have looked at today is how to look at data qualitatively, understanding the qualitative paradigm as subjective, it's relative. We've looked at the differences between quantitative and qualitative research, an overview of that. We've looked at different qualitative methods, such as interviews, focus groups, visual methods, ethnography. We've looked at online methods of doing qualitative research. And then we looked at research questions and how we write them to plan our qualitative study. Also, how we recognize qualitative research in the literature. And then lastly, we had a look at the benefits and the weaknesses of the qualitative study design. So I've really enjoyed presenting. It is now your turn to ask some questions. You can type your questions into the answer box, into the message box, and I will answer them as they come through. In the meantime, Leandra, can you put up the poll for us for the first question? While people are typing their questions, can you mix the data collection methods in one study? That is our question from Sandiswa. Absolutely. So our next webinar is going to be about mixed methods design. And we're going to look at how these two methods can complement one another. It's really powerful. I mean, a lot of the times when I do a qualitative study, I generally have a questionnaire that I take with me to the interview, and it collects demographic information, and it also collects some information about the participant. So the last study I did like that, I think it was about young fathers and their reasons for becoming fathers at such a young age. Were they planned or were they not planned? And in those interviews, I had a questionnaire with me that asked their age, it asked their schooling, it asked about their family, it asked about number of sexual partners, it asked different questions about the ages of the children, about girlfriends. And that questionnaire basically described the participant for me. I also had a section in there about their mental health status. And so I had some quantitative component to my qualitative study. So it is possible to mix the two together. Okay, here's another question. Is qualitative research ideal for a master's program considering the level of skilled manpower needed in data collection and collation? Absolutely, 100%. So we find that in a master's program, it's not about choosing the method. It's about your question and then finding the appropriate method to answer your question. So there have been plenty of master students who have done qualitative studies, who done studies on their own. They do 5 to 6 interviews on their own, they transcribe it, and they analyze the information. Okay, I would rather suggest that you get a supervisor that is also a qualitative person so that they can direct you with it, but absolutely possible. Is there a better and shorter approach to transcribing? I wish that there was. And it's especially difficult when the interview takes place in the language of the participant that may not be your own language or may not be English, because then you have to get a translator to translate that into English for you. There is no method better than doing it yourself, but generally it's outsourcing the information. There are some software programs that do transcribing for you, but you need to train those programs to say how you say the words or what you mean so that it can pick up on the accents. It takes a bit of time when you could have done your transcribing by then. Thank you for that question. Okay, here's another question. Can you determine the length of the interview without a pilot study? As a trained qualitative interviewer, you can, but I usually suggest to master students that they do a pilot study with somebody that they know, a friend or a colleague, while you are still writing the protocol. go through the questions with that person and kind of gauge how long it might take and what questions you need to change or introduce or take out. And generally, when you pilot it with somebody you know, you'll see that there are questions that just don't work and it doesn't, maybe the flow isn't correct. Piloting is always a great idea. Do you have any suggestions for where we can get a taste for some nice qualitative studies, like a go-to journal for qualitative studies? Yes, of course. So there's the Journal of Qualitative Research. What I'll do is when I send you the presentation, I'll put in some resources where you can, and types of journals that you can access qualitative studies with. I think that will be most helpful. Okay, do you understand the reason we do qualitative research? It seems like everybody understands and that makes me very happy. Are those all three of our questions, Leander? Do we have another one?
Hi, everyone. We got two more. I'll put them up now.
All right, thanks.
Just give me a second.
Okay. These are really great questions that are coming through. How many in-depth interviews minimum can one do for a master's dissertation? That's a very good question. So when you are with a trained qualitative supervisor, it won't be how many interviews, it will be how many people do I need to talk to answer my question and what lens am I using. So there are different types of qualitative research studies in terms of depth. So you've got general qualitative studies, but we also have methods called phenomenology, where we're looking at lived experiences of people. You can use the case study approach, where you just do one person. You can maybe be doing a case study on one family and how they engage and interact with one another. If you are looking at the topic like people's experiences of IVF, that was the one question, women's experiences of IVF that have failed treatment. Then for a study like that, I would have 5, 6, maybe 7 women where I speak about the topic in depth. But it's a very small sample size. But in depth, I mean, I'm getting their background history, I'm getting their life story, I'm getting their romantic involvement, whether or not it exists, I'm getting how they heard about IVF, what was the experiences when they first visited the IVF appointment and the doctor, what treatment strategy did they follow, what did they experience when it failed, how did they feel, and that can easily end up with like a 4-hour interview or maybe 2 interviews of 2 hours each with one person. That's loads of transcribing. That's like maybe 10 or 15 pages of data for one person. So then I would only do 5 or 6 interviews. So it just does depend on your question and what you are investigating. I hope that answers your question, Emmanuel. Okay, but there have been other instances, like when we did the Young Father study. That study was a South African-based population study. We did it in all the provinces, and we did it in 3 communities per province. And each focus group had 10 participants, which means we had 30 participants from every province. And in that study, our sample was about 150 participants in that qualitative study. But again, it was our purpose to do that, and it was our question. So it seems like everyone has a brief overview of what the qualitative methods are. That's lovely, and I'm excited to see that. As we put up the very last poll question, I would encourage you all to visit the Succeed website. So it's www.sun.ac.za. I'm just going to put it into the message box where we have uploaded our protocol workshops that are going to be happening, as well as the notes of previous workshops. Okay, this is our last question. Do you understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? Okay, Namkla, I think you were trying to say that we must do 200 in-depth interviews minimum for a master's dissertation. That is a bit much. I think for a master's dissertation, you shouldn't have more than 10 to 12 people that you interview because of the detail that is involved in an in-depth interview. If you were doing PhD, then possibly 200, but I've also seen some qualitative PhDs that had 2 focus groups, and each focus group there were 10 people each. But again, it just depends on your research question. So let's go back to the presentation. These are some resources on YouTube, but like I said, I will send you some articles and journals that you could use to access some examples of qualitative studies. And then we just like to thank our sponsors, our main funder for the Succeed project, the CDC. And this presentation will be available on the Succeed website. After this presentation, we will load it there, and you are more than welcome to download it. I've had a wonderful time with you, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Yes, that 200 is a bit much. All right, can you finish up your comments, and then we're going to close the webinar. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much. I will see you in the Eastern Cape next week for those of you that are attending the workshop. And I look forward to speaking about qualitative data analysis next week. For those of you that didn't get audio, again, this has been recorded. So we're going to be loading the recording onto the Succeed website, and you can download it from there. The workshop will be happening in Mthatha. So for those that have registered, we've sent the confirmation of registration for the workshop.